All right. Hi, everyone. So today we are talking with Kelly, another amazing Legacy Trip member. And Kelly, tell everyone a little bit about you and why you decided to go on this trip.
Sure. I am a wife and a mom of four, and I am also a pastor of a church in Kyle, Texas, which is a small town a little south of Austin. And for the past several years, have just been kind of simultaneously on a sort of faith journey where I've been kind of reimagining and kind of tearing away a lot of things that I kind of noticed that were a part of my tradition that were oppressive to a lot of people, particularly people that are pushed to the margins, and just sort of started having my eyes open to the realities of racism and white supremacy, and have been just slowly trying to learn as much as I can, growing, changing my mindset, changing my perspective. And I had been wanting to do, I've seen a few different of these sort of anti-racist pilgrimages that different organizations had done. And I have always been really drawn to Tina and her work, listening to her podcast, as well as Corey Leek, who also was a facilitator on this trip. And I saw that there was a trip happening, and I was like, you know what? Why not now? Now is as good a time as any, and just really felt like it was a very key and necessary piece in my journey to being anti-racist. And so I just felt like it was, I wanted to invest in that. I knew that it mattered. And that pretty much sums up kind of what led me that direction.
Was everyone in your community supportive of you going and understanding it?
They really were. They really were. They were, lots of positive and encouraging text messages from people in my church, that were grateful. And, as well as, my husband and my closest friends, and, they were all very supportive of it.
All right. So then you get there. Land us in the weekend. What were some of the highlights, takeaways?
I think one of the highlights for me was the people that we were with. I think there's just something so meaningful about, and I heard Jen say this, like before we left on the trip, Jen Kinney, she tweeted, I'm about to head to Alabama to bear witness with some other folks. And that phrase, bearing witness, just feels like it really adequately encompasses what was happening on that trip and in that room and in those conversations. So it was the kind of collective, not only desire to learn and desire to dismantle oppression, but it was also just this collective feeling of belonging and safety that was it just stuck out, even though most of us had never met each other, but for whatever reason, it just felt like there was this collective unified spirit, this kind of sense of just, we were all there to bear witness with one another. So that was really striking to me initially. And then, my goodness, I could go on forever. I think, the museum, I think, was so profoundly impactful. Like, it's hard to even put it into words what happened,
Yeah.
It's hard to really put into words what happened. It just that there was this overwhelming sense of, I think one thing that kind of comes to mind when I think about it is this passage of scripture in the book of Hebrews, where it talks about we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. And there was something, it was like being in that space and hearing these stories and reading about all of these things that took place, even on the actual soil we were standing on. there was just this sense of being surrounded by um, all of those ancestors that came before that, what they experienced, and it just was so, it was so profound to see things and to learn things that I never knew, and to even visually have this representation of some of these horrific things that happened, just, I think, brought a brand new level of grief and understanding. And it, like, because of that, there's this just fire I feel in my bones, that I'm like, this is work that just has to continue. I have no option but to keep doing this work, you know?
Yeah. I think also one of the things that I maybe wasn't anticipating or didn't know that would happen is that the kind of building on what you said is like the depth of which I learned about some scenarios or like tragedies and difficulties that I knew the headline, but then actually spending richer, deeper time researching, listening to all of those primary stories and storytellers and videos and pictures, it gave a whole new texture.
Yeah.
I think I didn't remember or know ever, or did it ever land in my bones that the boycott was a year.
Yeah.
And then really picturing my wonderful and lazy children walking anywhere for a year, miles and miles. Like, just, I think also time of age and seeing all the pictures of the kids and the moms and the books and the purses walking and walking for a year, and the richness of listening. There was one video I listened to where they said, we didn't think that everybody was gonna walk. We thought some people would just take the bus. We didn't realize this was gonna be, and then the intricacies of how the community, people who had cars, would have these drives and pick up people who are walking, and sort of the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Just as a community member in my own tiny community, thinking about things that happen and how we work together, it really struck me, the depth and the texture of a micro, obviously this is not a micro incident, but I'm saying one tiny thing of the whole weekend, it was that layered of the texture and depth to really wrap our heads around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there were so many moments like that too, where you would go, like you said, you knew the headline, but then, I mean, I can remember walking around the lynching memorial, and just, there were so many of the, pillars. There were some that would have, a couple names or one name or 5 names. And then there were some that would have like 20 names all on the same date. And so I would stop and I would look up that instance, and it would be these mass lynchings that I never learned about, never heard about, these things that had happened. And I think it's that, where, yes, I knew lynchings existed, and obviously they were incredibly horrific. And then to see the names and to be able to stand there and like hold those names close, and just, it was like the gravity of what happened just sank even deeper in my soul, and then to continue walking and to see, I think this was probably one of the other most impactful things for me, was when they listed on the wall the reasons given for why people were lynched. And so many of them were, was accused of, or what, was accused of talking to a white woman, walked past a white woman's window when she was baking. I mean, and it just, again, for me as a white woman, I had to sit with that, and still to this day continue to sit with that, of that reality of just kind of what my ancestors have been a part of, and how can I break that cycle,
Yeah. I think that I've been thinking a lot about like, what's not the difference, but what would the reason be for someone to go on a trip like this, given all of the kind of online learning. And I think what I'm really starting to unpack with these conversations and just continuing to integrate is the level of bearing witness, and embodiment and integration that is really deeply needed for us to truly understand the pain in order to repair and have a more just and equitable society. But I don't know how we all do that without actually knowing these layers and levels at a deeper, more physical, sensual, textured level.
Yeah, that embodiment piece is so key.
I think it's too easy to bypass with the mind. Oh yeah, I read that. I get it.
Yep.
That sucks. That's in the past. Let's move on.
Yep.
Because you don't see the way the museum maps out the story of where we are now. And in order to actually rebuild, or dismantle, it's going to take a whole different operating system. And I think if we just use the mind, we really are bypassing the stories of the body, of the land, of the history.
Yeah. That's, I don't know how we can, I don't know how we can ever truly embody anti-racism, like be anti-racist without that embodiment piece. I don't think, because it's like, it has to become not just something in your head, but it has to become a part of who you are. And it has to sink so deep within that it's like, you feel where you truly like come to that understanding of how we all really do belong to each other. And until we process these things in the context of community and embody that, I think that there's like, we'll hit a wall every time. I think,
I think that's why Dr. Resma's book is so important to the movement, because it really addresses all of the types of bodies that are involved in these discussions. And it still was a different impact than really making the trip. And I realize and know the privilege in saying, go on this trip and have this experience. And I'm curious, it makes me think about, well, what's around us that helps us continue to bring that level of witnessing and grieving, right? In order to clear the space for rebuilding in a seeing with clearer eyes and more truthful eyes, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
So anything else from the weekend you want to bring up before we talk about once you got home?
There was one thing for me that I think was a thing that happened to me, or not happened to me, but that I witnessed was when we went to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma and did that walk as a team. I really did. I mean, I've heard people say the phrase of like being on holy ground or hallowed ground, and I felt that so deeply that day. And after we had walked the bridge and we came back, and then we had kind of taken some pictures with each other and just kind of were with one another for a little bit. I remember I looked across before we headed back to the cars, and there was an older Black man who was walking on the opposite side of the street towards the bridge. And, he was, kind of hunched over, and it was very slow in his movements. You could tell that it wasn't real easy for him to walk, long distances. And he just walked up to the bridge. And when he got to it, he stopped and he put his hand on it for a second and just stood there and then kept walking. And when we first started doing our walk across the bridge, I had this thought of how many people drive, particularly white people, drive back and forth across this bridge every day, because they live there and they're going back and forth to wherever, and don't think about now, because, it just has become routine. Don't think about what happened there. And as I saw him stop and do that, I thought, but I mean, there's a chance maybe he was alive when that happened. Maybe he was a little boy when that happened. Maybe he had family members, depending on, if he's born and raised from Selma, maybe he had family members who were a part of that day. And that lives within him. It's not something he will ever forget. And it just was really profound to be able, again, to bear witness to that, and to just think just how there has got to be hope and grief mixed in, where it's like there have been strides made, and yet, it's hope and it's grief together.
Yeah, that really is was such a like a theme with our kind of closing, was how to hold both. Yeah. That's really stuck with me in lots of different interesting ways. So you get home. How was reintegration and kind of these past few weeks, and what now?
Gosh, I think it was one of those experiences that I was trying so hard to communicate to people the magnitude of what happened. And it was just, I found it very difficult to put it into words, because a lot of it felt like it was something that happened deep within me that was hard to explain. But I wanted to share that with as many people as I could, because I really do believe that, and like you said, it is a privilege to be able to do a trip like that, and I just felt this pull to just share my experiences in the hopes that maybe that would help kind of spark that interest in others, so I shared it with my family. I had some good conversations with my kids, just as a reminder of like, this work, it keeps going, and we have to keep doing this work. And so those conversations, and then with my congregation, being able to share my experiences and to present the opportunity and to say, listen, I think it's important that people invest in that. But I was like, I don't ever want, if someone wants to do this trip and they genuinely can't afford it, I'm like, that's what the church is for, like to help, to like help people who can't afford it. And so I think just sharing my experiences. So integration has been, I was curious coming home, because I've had these experiences before where I would go on a retreat, or I would go and do something. And you know how you kind of have almost like that kind of, it's like this afterglow experience, where you come home and it's like, you feel like, so like you're flying high for a little bit, but so I was kind of going, okay, is this going to be like, oh yeah, that's something I did, it just hasn't left me. And if I start to feel it leave me, I sit with it for a while, because I've realized like, I don't ever want that to leave me, because I think it's important that I keep those things close. And so I have found myself like, I'm like, gosh, I want to go on another trip, even though like I've already been there and experienced it. Like there's part of me that just really wants to do it again, because it was just so profound and so impactful. So so now I think moving forward, it's like, okay, looking at my community and going, okay, in what ways can I continue to be involved in this work in my community, because it's one thing to do the work and to change internally, but again, that embodiment piece, like if I'm not living that out in my body with other people in my community, then that's not taking it all the way from point A to point Z, and so just really finding ways to do that, and finding ways to continue the conversation with my church. I have a predominantly white church, and so it's like leading them toward that work, not leading them in it, because that's not my place, but leading them toward that work and encouraging them to continue that work is so vital. And so that's kind of been, for me, that's kind of the what's next, so.
Yeah, like you could do a church legacy trip with your church. Right? Members. I'm curious, last question, promise, is
sure. No, this is great.
you have a range of ages of your kids. And And so I'd love, especially, I know a lot of people who listen and watch this have a big range of ages. What were your kind of strategies, or how did you work with when you got back with your different age kiddos?
Yeah, I think my conversation with my older, like my teenage daughter, for instance, she's
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
That was a longer, more detailed conversation. You know,
Yeah.
it was, I shared a lot of details about what I witnessed there.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially talked about that white woman piece with her, you
Yeah.
know, because she's a white
Yeah.
woman, you know. And so I think that
Yeah.
it was just more details of that, and kind of inviting her into that work too. And then with my 6-year-old,
Yeah.
it was, you know, he was like, "Where did you go again, mom?" And so it was like explaining to him where I went, and it was like, you know, kind of connecting the dots of, you remember in school when you learn about Martin Luther King Jr.? And he's like, "Oh yeah." And then like talking about, you know, that with him, and kind of connecting those pieces. And then just, you know, as part of that conversation, just being like, yep, we as white people have a lot of work to do to make the world better. And you know, and so I think it was in just kind of coming down to his level, and sharing with him what I thought his 6-year-old mind could carry, you know. Yeah.
Well, I know Tina's been talking about doing a family trip, and I definitely was like, oh, I'd be so in for something like that.
Oh, I would too.
The other thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is our children's children, let's say, are going to look back and talk about this time that we're in, because this is a really powerful time, really powerful. And one of the things I kind of balanced when I got back with like how much to like, come on, guy, like I showed them pictures and we sat down and we had these conversations, and then they were like, okay, cool. Like they were into it, and then just kind of were like, when's dinner, you know, like, cause they're like, and I remember I woke up the next day and I was just kind of like, it's okay, because this, like what I noticed was an urgency, this like, again, this like white urgency of like, they got to know more and I'm not doing enough. And this kind of like rhetoric around worthiness and like action and shoving things down people's throats with, which I don't think is appropriate in our family dynamic. That's not how I parent. And so I really came to this kind of like heartful place of like, the wider, deeper generations will know like, well, what did your family do or whatever? And then they can like literally with pride be like, we learned, you know, this was part of what our great grandmother did, or great grandmother, like they showed us these pictures, they kept this going. And so I've really been kind of using that framework of the future to help with the integration, not being so fast paced.
Yeah.
And it also kind of gives like the nervous system a little bit of settling. I'm not off the hook. Let me be clear. There's a lot of work to do. And it will unfold so that the story over the ancestral time is about what some of us, like what many of us did over this time. It's not about me. It's not about that the individual. It's about what the collective did over this time. And when people listen to Tina's story about why she created Legacy, it all came out of this pain from witnessing these murders on TV and the videos over and over, and then creating this thing that then brings us together. So it's this wider, bigger story that, just like you said, we are somehow magnetically pulled into.
Yeah.
You know, there's this pull.
Yeah. I love what you said about kind of that white urgency, you know, where it's like, and I remember even on the trip, I remember Corey saying, you know, challenging us to kind of think through what our next steps were when we got home, but saying for some of you, maybe you need to not do anything right away. Like, and that I was like, yep, because what does that supremacist, like white supremacist, what does that tells us that we have to step in and we have to be the ones to be the hero and make everything better. And it was just this reminder of like you said, it's okay, like to have a conversation with our kids and have them go about their day, because that's not going to be the last time we talk about it. And it's not,
100%.
it's not this like, let's do this anti-racism journey for 2 months and then we're
Right.
done. It's like, no,
Right.
this is pretty much like, we're in this for
That's
the
rough.
long haul,
Yeah.
the rest of our lives, you know? And so you have to like make it, I think that's key with my kids, is figuring out, how do I make this just a normal,
Right.
regular part of our rhythm,
Right.
you know, regular part of our conversation? Because I think that in the long run, that actually will probably allow the roots to settle in deeper
Yeah.
than if we're trying to like, you know,
Yeah.
be the savior that swoops in 2 months and makes everything better, you know?
And I know, because of your work, how much you care about humans. And I have this same kind of like internal predicament around white saviorism and loving humans and caring. There's this very interesting intersection, where the white part becomes more harmful rather than the walking with humans. So I think I'm saying that out loud for any people who listen to this or watch this, who deeply care about humans and are caregivers and who take care of a lot of others and who are in white bodies, that it's an important thing to keep in check, that
Yeah.
we're walking with, we're sitting with, or sitting down, or stepping back, or being beside. But that if there's a, sort of a habit of always taking the lead of doing something or starting something new, to just kind of really check in with I think the why around that. I don't know. Do you relate to that at
Yeah,
all?
I 100%. That's
Yeah.
so good. That's so good. And it's yes. And for us, we have to admit that, you know, be humble enough to admit that like, yeah, it is a struggle. Like, I have to constantly interrogate my intent and my why all
Yeah.
the time. Even when even if I'm going to do a Sunday sermon about anti-racist work, we just did one last 2 Sundays ago, and I had like, the whole time it was like I had to deeply interrogate what I was saying, why I was saying it, my role in all of it, because
Yeah.
I know that I still, there will be times when I still get it wrong and when I cause harm, and the goal is to like do that the least amount as possible, but we can't do that without being mindful and asking ourselves why, like you said. Yeah.
Well, and I think it gets caught up in the other elements of kind of white supremacy culture around outcome, because one of the things that plays out is that kind of like over responsibility, over caring, let's just get it done and then move on. So it's like pace, urgency, saviorism, like it gets really sticky in there. And so for me, what's been super helpful is just the slow down, like literally, like I do this to myself, like just pull it back, hold on, like lean back, come back into your body. Like, okay, there's more here. Like, this is not something that needs to be hurry up and finish and put a bow on and move on and fix. And I think when you're a mother, when you are in clergy, when you're caring for people, when, there's all of these layers. And it feels important to say, because I'm not sure how much people realize how intertwined some of these personality habits and traits can be, and how unhooking from it, or at least being aware of it, can help us slow down enough to see a wider vision. And that's like so delicious for all of humanity, right? It helps all of us. And I remember
That's
that
it right there.
like whiteness hurts everybody. And that's part of the way, is that hook into like, well, I'll just take care of it. I'll just do it all myself, or I'll, get it all done. And so continues to be a real experience of deep, deep learning and humility.
Oh, 100%. And realizing, I think what I continue to tell myself too, is just how important it is for me to continue to do that deep inner work. That, I can't, I will never arrive. I will never be done. And if I'm not doing my internal work, then what I'm doing is I'm then setting myself up to cause more harm, by not taking care of what's in here first. And Oh, so good. That's all so good.
Amen.
Ah.
Any final, someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, I think I want to go. Anything you want to say to them? Any encouragement?
I mean, I'm like, just do it. Just go. I mean, you know, I remember when we were there and they kind of asked us each to say, why do you keep doing this work? You know, why do you keep showing up in this work? And for me, it's like well, number one, people are dying. So there's that, you know, actual people are dying because of white supremacy. And also it's like, once you open your eyes to fully see what's happening, it's like, you can't unsee that.
Correct.
And that sticks with you. And this trip, if I would say this, maybe someone who is, maybe new to this anti-racism work, or maybe has been doing it but is having a hard time connecting that embodiment piece, where it's a lot of head knowledge, a lot of books, a lot of studying, but you can feel like that embodiment piece is missing. I would say that a trip like this will make that connection. And I think it will drop something within your soul that you just can't escape, and that will propel you forward to doing whatever you can to cause less harm and to make our world more just and equitable and safe for Black folks. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
And
you.
just been so wonderful to get to know you better. Thanks.
Yes, same. Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been great.